Hello and welcome to Enchantment of Eternity's top 25 episodes of Star Trek. This time getting to my number 18, The Visitor from Deep Space Nine. This time joined by a different special guest, joined by Wes from the Pensky File. Haven't talked to you in a while. Thank you so much for coming on. Wes, how you doing?
Good. Thank you, Mark. Thank you for having me back. Good to talk with you again about Visitor. I was just thinking now that you said that, bringing me back. I can't remember what the last thing we discussed was. I don't know if you remember what it was off the top of your head.
I do. The last time we talked was actually on your channel for Preemptive Strike.
No, okay.
Yeah.
Yeah, then that was a little bit of a while ago. Yeah. Okay. Interesting. So, this same era of Star Trek, I guess that we're
Yeah.
going to be going through. But yeah, we're if just I guess to do my own little plug stuff. So me and my buddy Clay have a podcast called the Pensky Podcast. So we go through all the Star Trek episodes, and we're in Voyager currently. So it's kind of the same era, except later and much worse. But otherwise,
I'm trying to think where Voyager was at when this episode aired. I think it was early season 2 of
yeah,
Voyager.
yeah,
Yeah.
that makes sense. Yeah.
Yeah. But I was going to actually mention this might be a nice break to break away from season 3 of Voyager.
Yes. Yes, it absolutely is. Season 3. We're in season 3 of Voyager right now, and it's well, we're done with it. We finished it, but
Okay.
it was quite a journey. Feels like it's been 3 years.
Yeah. Yeah, in my personal opinion, I've said this on my channel before. I think season 3 of Voyager is one of the worst seasons in the entire Star Trek franchise. I really didn't like it.
I haven't crunched. We do like number. We keep track of our scores, so I haven't done the number crunching, and I have ranked all the seasons, but I don't know yet where this one stands. I would assume it's pretty low. Maybe not the worst, because that would go to like. I think by our system, TNG season 1 is still the worst, but Voyager season 3 might be knocking on the door of that. So we'll see.
Yeah, no, I just finished watching season 1 of TNG myself, covering it on my channel, and I've determined that is actually worse than season 3 of Voyager,
Yeah,
just
yeah,
marginally.
yeah. It's tough. It's you know, season 1 of TNG might have points for just like being charming in a certain way, where Voyager's third season is not very charming, and you've already seen it before. It's like
Yes.
it's not charming, and it's just years too late, so you end up where you are.
But I am curious to see how you and Clay, what you think of season 4, because that's one of my favorite seasons of
Yeah.
The franchise.
Yep. Yeah, we're looking forward to it.
All right, cool. So let's get into this episode, The Visitor. Now, the first question I want to ask is, what do you think the title The Visitor refers to? Because I think the easy answer to this is that it's Benjamin Sisko who's visiting Jake. But I'm wondering, I was thinking maybe it has a dual meaning of perhaps also referring to the young woman who visits older Jake, that she's perhaps the visitor who sparks this story that he tells.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I mean, it's a. I'm sorry, I will answer that question, but Brandon in the chat just told me to volume up. I volumed up, so we'll see. We'll see if anything changes. I'm going to talk for a minute, and if anyone complains, let me know. You can write in the chat whether or not the volume's too quiet. The visitor is, in the same way that the episode itself is layered and sort of well constructed. The visitor refers to many things. I think you mentioned 2 of them, which is that the visitor could be the person who's visiting. The young woman who's visiting the elder Jake. It could be Sisko visiting his son at random moments in time. It's just the idea of someone stepping in for a while and then leaving after that, but the impression remains. I mean, I guess your first instinct would be like the literal, or the easiest one would be it's the female character who's visiting Jake and he's telling the story too. But I think it's layered in such a way that all the plots kind of has some sort of visitor aspect to them, whether metaphorical or literal. So, but the layering is one of the reasons that it's one of the better Star Trek episodes, I think.
Oh, right. I hadn't actually thought of it in those terms. That does actually make sense. Cool. So yeah, I just wanted to get your overall thoughts on the episode. What you think of it, sort of generalized? What do you think of it as a whole?
Did you watch it for this recently?
I did. Yeah, I just watched it a couple hours ago.
Okay. I watched it last night. I don't think I'd seen it since we covered it on the podcast, and that would have been years ago. I I think that it's clearly super. It's really interesting to me coming from Voyager's third season. You kind of see like like we've intellectualized where the difference is and where things are different from all the sister series and stuff like that. But when you come back from Voyager and you go into like one of the peak DS9 seasons and one of the peak episodes of that season, it's kind of startling that they're even related, like that the series are related to each other, because they're so different from each other. Like in where we are in Voyager is basically where this one is. So this is early season 4. I think it's the second episode of season 4 of DS9.
Yeah.
We just finished the final season, or the last episode of season 3 in Scorpion and Voyager, and I don't think there's a single scene in Voyager that has the kind of like heft of maybe every scene in this one. Like maybe the worst scenes with this one are like old Dax and old Bashir, right? And you're kind of like, well, this has to happen because they have to get him to the vortex or whatever. And
Yeah, yeah.
this. But it's startling, and people say that the best part of Voyager is the cast, which is probably true. But the cast of characters are nowhere near as interesting as the other shows are at the same time. And I think that The Visitor really just highlights like Jake Sisko or Sirach Lofton is not even like one of the top 5 actors on the show, right? But he carries this episode and he does it so well. And it just, there's like emotion to it. There's like metaphor. There's different meanings. There's multiple layers of what's going on. Characters say things at the start of the episode that pay off at the end of the episode, which never happens in Voyager. And so it's like, it's really shocking. And in my opinion, Visitor is just one of the, it's got to be, it's way up there in terms of the Star Trek episodes. When you're talking about a franchise that has 800 episodes or whatever, being in the top 100 is quite impressive. So, I mean, it's going to go beyond that, but it's certainly one of my favorites, I think.
Yeah, of course, obviously, it's number 18 on my list. It's one of my favorite episodes. It is something that I always found, very sort of emotional. And it's interesting to hear you talk about how every scene is like done really well and has explicit meaning, which I hadn't thought of it in those terms. I just thought this was, again, a really well put together story that is one of the more, has that sort of dark emotion that Deep Space Nine is known for, and that Deep Space Nine does really well. Yet it has sort of a heartwarming feeling at the same time. And that sort of crisscross of emotion, I think, really works for this episode. And plus, and this is something you may not agree with, but this is something I've said in the past about Jake Sisko and Deep Space Nine, is that I don't think Jake Sisko, it's not that I think he's a bad character. I think the writers never really figured out what to do with him. And I think most of the episodes that center on him tend to not really work. That he works more as a tertiary character just to enhance Benjamin Sisko's storyline. I think this is the one notable exception. Like, I think this is when the writers really figure out, like, how can we really do a Jake-centered episode and do it justice. And I think they really went like overboard with actually like finally figuring out like how to utilize this character well.
Yeah, he's not. He's not the most dynamic character. I think some of the weakest aspect of this episode is actually dealing with the stuff that they had developed for Jake, which is that he wants to be a writer and he wants to not be in Starfleet, and he's kind of doing his own thing. To me, the first half of the episode is probably the only part that really drags a little bit, just because it is they're setting up this trick where they're going to flip the reveal on you and explain that this is Jake Sisko. They kind of do that early because they pan over the picture in the opening shot of
Yeah.
whose picture is there, but you don't exactly know what's going on. And the development of, like, Cisco has to have the accident and Jake has to be trying to write that story, and that's when Cisco delivers that line about, like, every once in a while you have to, like, pick your head up out of your book and, like, see what's going on around you. And that's the moment where I think that the episode drags the most. I think that it has a fantastic, like, last 20 minutes to it, but I would agree that most of it is just it's emotionally touching and, like, meaningful in a way that I think that the franchise sort of rarely gets to in the context. Like, there's probably sub 50 episodes that do that, and for how many there are, it's a very low batting average for the show to actually do it. But I think that this one just lands particularly well. Since becoming a father, it lands in a different way. Like, you were talking about one of the things that had changed for you. The thing that changed for me the most since being a dad and watching is that when I was younger, I used to watch this and never think that the tragedy was Ben Sisko's to be going through. But in some ways, Ben Sisko's life is either just as bad or worse from having to watch what Jake Sisko is going through. And it does this really clever thing where it plays both of them off each other, and where the failings of the son and his inability to let go of his father change his life, that causes the stress for Ben Sisko in the sort of nether realm that he's living in, where he just can't be. He has that scene where he's yelling at him, like, you have to promise me that you're going to, like, try to live your life and forget about me. And I think that's what makes it so effective. It's not just a one-way street. It's like all angles of the story are working together to get somewhere.
Yeah, no, that's definitely a very good point. I was trying to think if there were any other Star Trek episodes in the franchise that was just powerful, that dealt more with a parental relationship rather than, like, a friendship or a romantic relationship. And I guess the only one I could think of that was anywhere near this would be, like, maybe The Inner Light, because that dealt with Picard. What would he be like being a father?
Yeah.
But that wasn't as powerful specifically to the father-son relationship the way this episode is, though.
No, and they invented the relationship in that one. It's not something that exists through the
Yeah.
series for it. But I mean, obviously DS9 is going to be rare just because it's the one the one show that, outside of Wesley Crusher, like, it has a parental relationship in it. And so, I think it works. Because the Jake and the Ben thing is always fundamental to the series. It starts the whole thing. Like, they're being together. To me, I don't think DS9 messed it up, but DS9 never really wrangled it the way that they could have. They didn't screw it up, but at the same time, excuse me, they didn't lean too heavily on it either.
Now, I wanted to address something Norman Buchholz in the chat, because this is a very interesting thought, saying it's like grieving while someone who has Alzheimer's or a similar degenerative disease are sometimes there, sometimes back, with the hope. I hadn't thought of that angle of it, but I think that could be a way to describe it. I think, and I wanted to talk now more about the specific, like, what this episode is about, because for me, it's less about, like, a son who loses his father, because they, in fact, draw the distinction in this episode early on, where older Jake tells Melanie, like, people have lost parents before. They usually move on and they get on with their lives. But that's not what happens in this case, because this case they use a weird sci-fi phenomenon to make it so that Benjamin is kind of lost but kind of not, and he comes back apparently and keeps returning, and that's what screws with Jake's life. So an analogy I sort of drew as someone who is not a father, but I try to draw from something from my personal life, and I don't know if this analogy really holds, but what I was drawn to is somewhat like going through a divorce or a bad breakup, where if you keep seeing that person, you can never move on, you can never let go. So the better thing is to just cut off ties entirely so that you're able to start a new life.
Yeah.
And I think there could be more sort of analogies drawn to that. Yeah. So what do you think about that?
Yeah, the analogy that I was thinking of is Natalie Holloway was in the news recently because she was the girl who was killed in Aruba like 20 years ago. Her mother was in the news because the the kid that they always thought did it was arrested. He had killed someone else recently, but he had some sort of fraud thing that he was brought in, and he gave a statement, and apparently he gave his description of what had happened, and I think that the visitor is along that lines in terms of the mother, which is that you never really know, you can never really know what happened,
Hmm.
and the inability to move on is because you never had a body and you never saw anything. Like you can never really prove what's happened, and the fact that her killer has previously lied about things and has told tall tales and told various versions of things. Even with this new confession, there's a part of you that you'll never really believe it. It's never really actually what happened to you because you're never going to know. And I think that's what it is. It's about this the pain of not knowing causes you to have this visitor of a memory all the time, and the visitor doesn't allow you to move on at all. It just it's something that is constantly reminding you, something that's constantly popping up, and the that's the analogy. It's really just an inability, like to let something that you can't control affect your life to the way that Jake Sisko does is both a positive and a negative in this episode. It's a positive because shows the connection between the two of them, but it's a negative because he basically wasted one of his lifelines on this when Cisco wouldn't
Mm.
want that to happen to him either.
No, that's definitely a very interesting way to think about it. It also reminds me of another way I was thinking about this was like a parent who had a child who went missing, or something like that, where they never knew what happened,
Right.
and how it's harder to let go when you're not don't have that certainty of what exactly happened.
Yeah. And I think that's what the sci-fi angle kind of captures is that you just don't know what excuse me, getting over a cold. You just don't know. There is no good answer. Like they take the realistic uncertainty aspect and they give a sci-fi angle, which is that Cisco
Mm.
is bending in and out of time or whatever. They don't even really care. That's what DS9 does great. Is it doesn't really care what the sci-fi construction is. Voyager would have spent 45 minutes or 43 minutes like explaining what the problem was with the temporal mechanics.
Yep.
Um, and it avoids that, and it just allows the actors to do their thing. They have like great little scenes between everybody, but I do think it's about that. It's about the pain of not being able. It's very anti-stoic. It's like you're consumed with something that you can't control, and focusing on the things that you can't control and that are outside of your realm are only going to cause you suffering. And that's what Jake realizes, except that the episode kind of redeems it at the end by saying that it was all a great sacrifice for his father, which is interesting. I'm actually curious what you think about the ending of this episode and whether it matches with the tone of the rest of it.
Okay. Yep. Sure. We will get there.
Sure.
I know there's Jay Keeman 99 in the chat saying wasn't not a huge fan of this episode because it has a bad ending. How the future is so different. That can also how this is what happens to Jake 4 years later, so it still happens to him. Yeah, I'm not sure of that reason, but that's an interesting way to put about it. I
How the
will
future
say,
is so different than canon.
yeah, I'm sure
Well, because
that's something.
yeah, I mean, he has a timeline split, right? Like the
Yeah,
thing doesn't exist the same way.
yeah. But that is also something I want to talk about a bit later
Sure.
too. um,
But
so
that's a good example of one of the things that separates the episode and separates DS9, again, stepping back into this in the middle of Voyager, stepping back into this, you get a sense that the universe of DS9 is real. Like an outcome of Cisco disappearing is that the Klingons take over the station because there's still it's an offshoot of that Klingon not civil war, but the Klingon Cardassian conflict that's going on at this point.
Yeah.
And it's like Voyager has nothing like that. Like you can't have a script that is like, what do we talk about in this moment? And DS9 goes, well, we have this whole backdrop of this escalating conflict that's going on. And it's like, we could draw examples from that. And they do. And, the Klingons take over the station. That causes Jake to go back to Earth. It causes all these things to happen. They learn that Cisco's connected to Jake because he's no longer on the station and things like that. And I think it's a nice ability of a show that has been like developing things in the background to be able to, in a downtime where you need to explain what a character is doing and why they're in a different place, you can draw from the extensive material that you've developed to that point. And, a show like Voyager would have a very difficult time explaining what someone like Chakotay did in an alternate future, because you'd be like, I don't know what Chakotay would do. What would he do?
Yeah.
I don't know if that makes sense, but I found that very interesting, and it was neat coming back to the show after so long in this episode in particular.
Well, I will say, getting into this, I would say that this is probably the aspect of the show that's my least favorite aspect of this episode, that I'm not the biggest fan of. Although it doesn't really hold me back like that much. Like I wouldn't give it a 5 out of 10 because of it, but it seems weird going back and watching this episode now after seeing where Deep Space Nine goes, and that it's more sort of Dominion orientated, and having Dominion barely play a part in this hypothetical future. It's more about the Klingons, which is something they only set up in the previous episodes. So it seems like Deep Space Nine, for the most part, was about the Dominion Cardassian, and they pivot to this Klingon conflict, and all of a sudden that takes the drive of this future. But it's something that doesn't, as I said, it doesn't really bother me incredibly. It is a slight annoyance to this episode. It makes it stand out a bit, I think. But it doesn't bother me too much because I realize from a production standpoint, that's the storyline they were trying to push this season. And so they would go in that direction. But it's also a storyline I wasn't a huge fan of in season 4, which is also why it kind of just slightly annoys me.
Yeah. Sorry, what specifically wasn't the storyline that you didn't like in season 4?
The conflict with the Klingons.
Oh.
I thought it should have been relegated to the one episode Way of the Warrior. I didn't think they should try to make it a season-long arc, and I don't think it really worked particularly well as a season-long arc.
Oh, interesting. Yeah, I don't... I'm indifferent to, like, the more that I watch of Star Trek and stuff like that, the more I come to a weird, like, I find myself not easily landing in a place where I can say that canon matters to me, really. It's like, there are like egregious examples where it feels like it does matter. Mm-hmm. And then there are non-egregious matters where this episode in particular, like, it couldn't do anything canon-wise that I would be like, wow, it just ruined this episode. There's no change. It could say that Jim Kirk was a hologram. And I'd be like, that's fine. Like, who cares? It doesn't mean anything because it's just like as long the show and the franchise is at its most effective when it's not so slavish to canon that it can actually like make a point and have it be internally coherent with itself and not be super concerned about the fact that someone 150 episodes said something off like on the background that caused this thing not to happen. And I feel like The Visitor is just like an example of that. It's an alternate future. Mm-hmm. It's one thing that could have happened. I think it fits in well with the Klingon stuff. My interpretation of the Dominion is that the Klingons seem to have not been pushing into the Gamma Quadrant as much because they have that line about like the Federation wants to go in because they want to see what the Dominion are up to. So it makes it implies that the Dominion, once no one is coming through the wormhole, they stop coming through the other way. to attack people, that makes sense to me. But it is just more importantly, I don't think there's anything out of character for the Ciscos in this. I think that
Yes.
everything that they do is perfectly in line with how those characters are developed and have been written, and I think that that's what makes the episode work so well.
Yeah, no, I actually totally agree with that. And that's why I say it doesn't bother me too much, because that's not the focus of the episode. The focus is the characters, the Cisco, and maybe if they made Jim Kirk a hologram, maybe that would be a line too far. But
it would be a strange thing to bring up, I think, in the context.
But I don't think they go too far. It just reminds me of this direction I wasn't a huge fan of in season 4 they went in. But that's, as I said, it's not a big deal. It's something I can sort of hand wave away, especially when the episode is as good as this. And that's just, me personally.
Well, off topic question, not off topic, but like tangential question.
Yeah.
What's the worst DS9 storyline? Not in this episode, but what is DS9 at its nadir for you in terms of something that lasted like multiple episodes at its low point?
The Ferengi storyline. Can I say that the whole thing with Grant?
So like Ferengi episodes would be your low point.
Yes. Yeah, easily.
Yeah, because I think like one of our surprising things was that DS9 has a tremendous amount of terrible storylines in it, like which is for 180 episodes or whatever it ran. But like the Mirror episodes are bad, the Ferengi episodes are bad, the Gul Dukat ending the series storyline is terrible. Like that's very funny. There's a moment in that where they just didn't know what to do, so they have Dukat go blind, right? And he just leaves for a couple episodes, and then he comes back and is like, I can see again, and then they resume his story. It's so bizarre. But like DS9 had a lot of DS9 hit its high points more often than its low points, but it did seem to have a ton of low points that it just wanted to keep coming back at. It just wanted to do more Mirror Universe and stuff like that. But
yeah,
that was my point about the Ciscos never got to that point of like, the Ciscos never don't work as a father and son pairing. Interestingly, like the show never. I don't think they did a lot with them, but they didn't screw it up to the point where you're like, not another Cisco father son fishing trip or something like that. Like they spaced it out pretty well.
Yeah. Well, I feel like they didn't focus on it like so like singularly like they did in this episode very often. Usually it was a sort of background thing, and I think it actually worked very well in that regard.
Yep.
Which is why I say in a few other episodes that tried to focus on Jake, I think they kind of didn't really know how to handle him very well.
Well, they usually have to do something like they bring a mirror universe of his mother back or something, and it's like, it's not necessary. But he like Jake's very good in the pilot as well. Like he serves a important role in the pilot, is what it is. And I think that, in some ways, like you could say that, like the best of both worlds, in my opinion, the best of both worlds is like the end of the Riker arc. Really, like that is his ending story, and he just happened to be a character who existed on the show after that. But his development peaked at that point where he makes the realization that he's not ready to be captain, and that decision carries him through the rest of the series, right? Because he never becomes captain after that. This is the Visitor is kind of in the same spot where it is the peak Cisco family episode, but it's very early in the show. They don't do it later. It's like nothing really can sum up their relationship better than what the Visitor does, and it did it in an early season of the show.
Well, it's like middle season. It's sort of mid show.
It is, but it's not season 7. Let's say goodbye to everybody, and we have our Cisco like what this is all meant episode.
Well, and they never tried to top it, which was very smart of them. They would call back to it later, like they did a callback in the finale. They end the whole show with Jake looking out into space, after his dad.
Yep.
But so that's why I think it worked. So I wanted to get a little bit more into the specifics of Jake and how he was dealing with his father's loss, because I thought it was a very interesting moment. One of the moments I definitely wanted to highlight, because actually this is something I really noticed in my rewatch. I don't think I've noticed before, is the moment where Kira is begging Jake to leave, but he refuses to go, and she vows to support him. That the way that was they chose to light that scene, I never noticed before, but it was very dark. Like it had very minimal lighting and sort of highlighted. That was a very interesting stylistic choice. Sort of highlighted the tone of everything that was going on and how this was a very dark situation. Yet Kira was still sort of backing them. I thought that
It's a
was a
very
nice.
close shot too. It's a very
Yes,
tight shot of the two.
yeah, that too. Yeah, so I thought that was a very uh, really interesting way to highlight how Jake was dealing with Benjamin's death. And this is before we get into the temporal whatever that happens later.
Yeah, I just it's a credit to the show. I was going to say that I think that like it's maybe the example of like you live with these characters long enough and you start to connect with them. Although my wife does not like Star Trek, and she didn't watch it this time, but she watched it last time. And the visitor did. The visitor always makes me a little bit. The room gets a little bit dusty. It's a very sad episode.
Yeah.
She cried as well at it, and it's like my point of bringing that up is just to say that like sometimes you wonder about those scenes whether or not it's just that you feel something about the Kira and Jake scene because you've spent 3-4 years watching the characters to that point. You've watched like 100 episodes of them. But I think it works even outside of that. I think, and I think that's one of the episode's strengths is that like you don't even really need to know who Kira is for that scene to be effective. And you know, that's something that maybe we didn't recognize while we were doing our watch through of DS9 because we weren't quite prepared for what was going to come after. But there is no capability of the shows after DS9 to have character interactions like that for some reason. They just can't happen. They just never work. It never, like, the characters aren't built for it. And there's a sense of connection on DS9 that makes the characters feel much more important to the universe than they do in the later shows. And it really sticks out in this episode that the characters have a heft to them. Like they mean something in and outside of themselves. And that's what makes the episode work. And I think that's what makes the Kira and Jake scene work. Like Lofton's not a great actor, but he does well in that scene with the Now Visitor.
Well, I would say that throughout the entire episode. Like, I think this is definitely some of his best work.
Yeah.
Particularly the first scene when Benjamin first appears and they're lying in the infirmary, and he just asks how he's doing, and Jake just breaks down, and starts freaking out. I thought that was a brilliant performance.
Yeah. What would you? Although we always laugh, and I don't know if I consider it bad. Cisco's way of why can't I think of the actor who plays Ben Cisco? What's his name? It's
Avery Brooks.
Avery Brooks.
Yeah.
Avery Brooks's way of embracing his actor son is strange to me. It never really feels. He does a lot of like head holding and like putting his head on them, and I don't know. It's not something that I find it very theatrical, but I find it very strange at the same time. It doesn't in a lot of the ways that I feel the Brooks performances. It's kind of like interesting, but there's a very strange decision that you're making. But what did you think of? Because Lofton's only in it for a little bit. He gets an at bat and he hits a double and he gets on base and things are good. And then he hands it off to Tony Todd. And I was wondering what you thought about Tony Todd's performance here as the middle-aged and old guy.
So that was actually one of the things I wanted to bring up because I think Tony Todd is a great actor. And I think he's doing a good performance. And I think he acts well in roles like Kern and the Hirogen he'll play in season 4 of Voyager. But here, especially when I rewatched recently, I was wondering if he was miscast. I don't know if he was the right actor to play an older Jake. I think
old Jake or middle-aged Jake, because I think they're two distinct performances.
I would say both, and I agree they are distinct performances. But I think with both of them, I feel like I think especially as old Jake, I think he does outstanding performance. So don't get me wrong, but I just wonder if I just have a hard time buying him as Jake. Like he seems a bit more sort of gruff, uh, and maybe they could have found an actor who sort of fit the role a bit better.
Yeah, he buffed up quite a bit
Yeah.
after being 18. Like he got a little bit heavier. Because I actually think the old age version of Jake is the worst acted of the
Oh,
three.
really? Oh,
Yeah,
I actually like that performance. Okay.
he reminds me strongly of that TNG episode. Is it Too Short a Season? What's the one in the first season with the old admiral who shows up?
Yes. Yeah. Too short a season.
Yeah, it's this unfortunate thing of they put a ton of old age makeup on somebody, and it's like, it's a young actor who's having to go like, and then he gave me the tone, and it's like, wow, this is incredibly weird. I thought his middle-aged version was good. I thought because Tony Todd there felt to me like he was actually mimicking Sirach Lofton in some ways. Like he had a physicality that was the same.
Oh.
The older version feels a little bit too disconnected, I think, which is kind of the point because he's not supposed to be
Yeah.
the same person. But I really don't like actors pretending to be old. It's not a good. It's not a. At least don't do it in this way where it's like. Because I think that Bashir and Dax are also kind of like clownish in their old age acting. It's like I wish this was a little bit better. I wish they just stuck to their normal performance, but at 50% energy and put gray in their hair and just called it a day. And it was like, this is it. Because Bashir and Dax do that weird thing where they start talking like old people from like the 1960s, and it's like this doesn't make any sense.
Actually, I totally see what you're saying about Tony Todd. I would say like his performance through most of the what you call the framing device, the narration scenes.
Where's the old man talking to the young girl?
I definitely get what you're saying in those performances that I wouldn't say it's quite as bad as Mark Jameson in Too Short a Season.
He's much worse. He's the
that was
Academy
one of the
Award
worst old man performance. Oh, Mr. Picard, you understand?
It's like wheelchair can't fit on the bridge of the Enterprise. It's very funny. Yeah.
But no, I definitely get that same vibe. But I would say when I was saying earlier, I thought he gave a good performance. I was thinking specifically of his final scene with Benjamin at the end of the episode.
Yeah.
I think he
and
did.
He's dying there too, which makes me appreciate the performance makes more sense. And that was kind of something I didn't maybe realize until this time. Maybe I have, and I never thought about it. He poisons himself at the very start of the episode, which is something you can miss, I suppose, because he does it first. And I think the implication is that you might think he's just taking medicine because he's so old, but that's the fatal whatever he did to himself, I suppose.
Yeah.
He relies a lot on plot development wise. This relies a lot on perfect timing for everything to work out for his plan. He has to poison himself at the right moment. Ben Sisko, like I always think the parody version of this episode is that at the end he's like, it's good to have you here because if I die first, you'll snap back. And then Ben Sisko just disappears again, and he's like, oh, God damn it! Like there's no saving him at that point. So he perfectly times his death, which is a nice touch on the episode.
Yeah, I mean, I guess he did study all the temporal mechanics of the situation, so I would buy that he would know exactly when Benjamin was going and when the.
Did they ever mention that? I always got the sense they were never quite sure when Sisko was supposed to turn up again. I guess it's because of the wormhole does something, but
yeah. So Dax, like they did it before, like Sisko's last appearance when Jake was a middle-aged man. They mentioned that Dax figured out when he was going to appear, and then when older Jake was talking to Melanie, he mentioned, "Oh, my dad's coming today," so he knew exactly when he was coming.
Yeah, as Norman says, it was mathematic equations and temporal mechanics. He was the leading scholar in those fields.
Yeah. But I think one of the tragedies of this episode that really, really works for me, I think again one of the most emotional scenes is that scene in the when Jake is sort of a middle-aged man and on the Defiant when they're bringing Cisco back, because earlier Jake had moved on with his life with a wife and Benjamin sees them and they're like, oh, can I have grandkids? It was a really heartwarming scene, but then in narration, older Jake tells us how he threw his life away and his obsession with his father got the better of him. And seeing that tragedy of Benjamin realizing this and like the whole promise me scene, I think that may be the most powerful scene of the episode when he realizes that Jake was throwing his life away for him. Do you think it weakens the episode that we got most of that dramatic turn in Jake's character through narration of older Jake telling Melanie this, like telling
No,
the audience?
no, because I think the pacing works. If I have any issue with the pacing, it's that it's tough because it's like kind of a hindsight is 2020 thing. The
Mm,
only pacing issue I have is the early parts, but I think that like for the first time viewer, you have to make Cisco's death seem like it's actually happened. So like you can't have him come back immediately. So you have to spend a little bit of time with like the funeral and then Jake is
yes.
moping around the station and stuff like that. Um, I don't mind it because I think that all of that detail about his wife leaving and him going back at like 38 to get a PhD and some other thing. That's another great Star Trek thing, which is that in the Star Trek universe, everyone can just kind of do anything. So it's like
Mm.
if you're a writer, you can just decide I'd rather study temporal mechanics and I'll go
Yeah.
get a PhD in that. Um, which is tough. I don't think I could just become a STEM major at this point and be like, well, I'll just get a PhD in like plasma engineering or something. Um, but I think that like the crux of it is on the Cisco relationship, and I think that the
Mm.
details that they add to it are just to give you a sense of Ben Cisco's disappointment that Jake Cisco has chosen to live his life this way. So it's like you don't really need to spend that much time with the wife, and you don't need to know about his whole breakup and stuff like that. It's really just the patheticness of Jake in that scene is what does it when they're in the white light area
Yeah.
where Jake gets sucked into that. It's just he's tried so hard and it's all failing, and the trying hard is what's upsetting to Ben Cisco. Is the key to that sequence. It's that
Mm.
like you have to stop doing this because like I put myself in. I find that an incredibly mature and adult take in a franchise that does not always do that. But it's like if I was stuck in the Ben Cisco thing, it's worse. It's worse for your child to be wasting their life trying to get you back than it is to be stuck in that place, whatever that place is. We don't even get a sense of what that place is, but apparently Cisco doesn't feel like time is passing, so he's not bored or anything like that. But
Yeah, I don't think he experiences anything like
he
in
just
between.
stands there. Yeah, he
Yeah.
just stands in that way. But I think that's what's so, and that's what changed for me getting older is that realization is huge. And I think that
Mm.
that adds a ton of depth to the episode where it's just that Ben Cisco is actually suffering the most. And that's what earns the ending, in my opinion, which is that when it flips and Ben Cisco is the one that remembers what happened and Jake has no idea about what happened, that kind of feels unearned because you don't want to get to that point where this is Jake's story and all of a sudden we now focus on Cisco. But I think
Mm.
that the script itself does a good enough job of balancing the two where when Jake does not remember, Cisco remembering means something because he understands like what it all meant and he can reinforce it with his son, but it's also just like he he also learns the difference of what could have been and where how would you say it? Cisco learns, he takes away from his own perspective in a way that doesn't really mar what Jake is going to do as this new person who doesn't remember any of this stuff happening. And I think it's a clever twist that allows there to be, it's not a reset button because Cisco has changed from it. Like there's something
Mm.
different there, but it's not with the
Yes.
main character of the episode.
Yeah. No, I agree. And I also, yeah, I agree with what you were saying earlier too, ultimately, because I was wondering myself, oh, is it a narrative cheat for us to hear this through narration? Because a lot of people who writing teachers who study writer will say never use narration, but I think there are instances, and I think you hit the nail on the head that the main point is this Benjamin and Jake relationship. And so the stuff with his wife is stuff we don't really need to see on screen. And plus, this is a 45-minute episode, and that we don't
They
really
can't
have to
they
spend
can't do
time.
voiceover narration of Jake walking down the hall and he says, "So my father appeared from the void yesterday, and I talked to him, and now I've changed
Yes,
my life." Yeah,
exactly. Yeah. And well, you notice when he's talking to Melanie, whenever there's a scene with him and Benjamin, we see it. It's not just
yeah.
him, we don't hear it. So that's done purposely. So I agree. I think the pacing was actually done really well. I did want to talk more about the final scene where Benjamin showed up to old Jake and he says, "Oh, it won't be long now. He's going to die." The question I had, I don't know if this means anything, but he made a point to write more stories, and he even tells Melanie this. He gives her the stories, and he spent all this time to write these stories, yet he never got them published. And he knows that he's going to purposely die with Benjamin, and they're going to rewrite history. So it makes me wonder, like, what really was the point of getting back to writing, other than maybe he to please Benjamin? Because when Benjamin shows up and sees his writing, it's like, "Oh, you got back to your writing, how great." um, that maybe that was the point of it. I don't know. What was your take on that?
It's a very good question, and I don't know. I don't know why they had him write at the end because that feels counterproductive to what they're trying to do. Um, I mean, I guess maybe not. So I guess the sense that I'd say it was counterproductive is that when you get to the very end and Jake is going to sacrifice his life to save Cisco and reset everything, the sadness of his life being driven to that point is what I consider to be the point. I guess that there is the problem for me is that there is no scene where, and I don't know if it undermines it, so you can let me know. There is no scene where Jake, waiting for his father to come back, realizes that he wasted his life and he needs to write his last couple stories before he dies.
Yeah,
That's maybe what they're trying to do. They're trying to say that Jake has realized at this point late in his life that he wasted his time searching for his father, and he didn't get the publishing and he didn't write the stories and everything that he wanted to. So he does it at the very end. I do think that it kind of I don't think there's anything wrong with that, but I do think that it undercuts the patheticness of his life is key to the end, I think.
mm-hmm.
And so I'm not against it, but I feel like someone smarter than me could argue a very coherent argument either way, really. So I don't know where I end up on it.
Yeah. I'm not against it either. I was just it was a curiosity for me, like what they were exactly. But it might just be as simple as he wanted to please his father
Do
next
they
time.
say when he wrote it? Is there any line in the script that says he's writing again? I don't think there is
Well,
one like that.
he wrote it sometime between the previous scene in the white thingy and this scene.
Right.
So sometime in between, he realized that what was happening, and so there's no point wasting his life, trying to get Benjamin back. So he just went back to writing.
Yeah. Yeah, I don't. I can see the positives in both direction. I think that maybe it's if they're what they're trying to say is that it is him realizing what's important in life and that he's wasting his time with his father is the thing. Then I can see that. Although I think the script should have made that more explicit if that's what they're trying to
Yeah.
do.
Um. So and also the part where Jake dies and he tells Benjamin that he's about to die, and Benjamin, of course, freaks out because what father wouldn't of a son saying he's about to kill himself? But Jake explains, "No, I'm not just doing it for you. Also doing it for me, for the boy I was, so I have a better life."
Yeah.
Um, so I thought that was a very powerful ending too. That he's saying that, don't worry, I'm not just doing this for you. I'm also doing it for me because I wasted my life and I want to have a second chance.
Yeah, I think it's it's walking a pretty clever line between being a reset button push and being earned character wise. Um, I think it walks it pretty deftly, because I don't think that this is really like I think I was reading a lot of reviews. A lot of reviews complain about that this is the resettiest of the resetty button pushes, and I don't really
Which
think it
I
is.
disagree with that.
Yeah, and so the only problem I have is that Jake learning what has happened in his old and I still think it works. So the only problem that I would have is that Jake learning in his old age what he needs to do to save Cisco is that if he kills himself, he basically gets to restart his life over again, and Cisco gets to restart his. That is tough, but I think that it's saved by his life leading to that point was a complete and utter waste of time for
Yeah,
everybody. Like he accomplished nothing.
yeah,
So him getting a reset there, I think, is fine. It's worse if like nothing had happened to him and it's just kind of like the story and time is passing and his life is the same, and then he gets to do it. Like if he had lived if you totally changed this episode and that Jake was not particularly bothered by his father, it's just kind of a weird thing that he kept showing up and he's like, maybe I'll try to figure out how to save him one day.
yeah,
Then the reset doesn't make a lot of sense, but
yes,
really wasting his life and showing them both kind of like in a Christmas Carol kind of way of like what the past, future, and present could be, makes it okay, in my opinion. I consider it to be a pretty good ending that I could probably, again, say that someone might come up with a criticism of be like, oh, that's a good point. But I don't think that it has an emotional truth to it that I think the script manages to accomplish.
Did you mention earlier that you did have a complaint with the ending?
I think that was it. It's really just the whether or not the death of the the suicide of Jake Sisko is narratively earned in the sense that it feels like something. It feels like it's not just a Jake Sisko gets out of jail free card, really. And I think so.
Yeah, and I think maybe this is another case of this revelation or this change in Jake mostly occurred off screen and we were sort of told about, but it's between the two incidents of his father saying, "Promise me, Jake," and then him realizing what's going on. So most of it
Right.
did occur off screen. So I could definitely see that. I was personally was willing to go with what they were selling, that I could buy that he got much older and sort of came to conclusion that or came at peace, especially being an old man close to death anyway, that he came more at peace with that.
Yeah. Yep. Agreed.
Um, Now, I also wanted to talk about the framing device because this is actually, I don't know how most people feel about this, but I actually love this aspect of the episode as well. I think it really works. I think the actress who plays the young woman who aspiring author does a really good job. Is she Andrew Robinson's daughter? Am I remembering that correctly?
That sounds it sounds correct.
Yeah.
I don't know if that's the exact relationship, but I think it is something to do with him.
Yeah. But anyway, yeah, I think she does an amazing job in this episode, and I like the start of it where she shows up and she asks, "Hey, can you tell me the story why you stopped writing?" And he's like, "Well, normally in any other day I would send you on your way, but you showed up today of all days." And at first, I just felt like, "Oh, that's a profound thing," but then by the time you get to the end of the episode, you realize it's because he knows it's his last day being alive, that he's
Yep.
about to kill himself, and that's why it's such a powerful scene. Oh yes, in the chat, Norman and Brendan are saying yes. So yes, it is Andrew Robinson's daughter. Yeah,
Yep.
but yeah, and throughout I like the sort of their interaction, and I think we talked about earlier how that's actually an interesting narration device to sort of skip over the parts that we actually don't need to see on screen. So,
Yep.
and I actually got sort of teary-eyed about this character. I don't know whatever happened to this character when the timeline changed, but I think the way they portrayed her as someone who was really, wanting to reach out to her favorite author and the effect it had on Jake, I think this really works to enhance the episode.
Yeah. She has good She is vital, and I think it's the strength of the episode in that she's much like Tony Todd in that this is an episode, one of the best episodes of the franchise that hands over everything to guest actors, which is kind of remarkable that that would
Mm.
happen. Um, it almost adds something to it where, because I don't think that either she nor Tony Todd are great actors in any sense. Like I think that Tony Todd is like really great as Kern, but Kern is like a particular kind of like
Yes.
Klingon-y acting. And I'm not particularly convinced that, like the positive about Tony Todd is that he captures sort of the goofy, not great actingness of Sirach Lofton in an
Mm.
interesting way. So it's like it kind of continues that. I thought that she was the same. I think that she's good, but my concern about it, I distinctly remember this watching this with my wife, is that a lot of the early scenes between old Tony Todd playing Jake and this actress, I remember watching it thinking, you know, when you watch something with someone and you're like, oh, I don't think this person is enjoying this. I don't think this, like, I hope something
Yeah.
happens in this movie real quick because this is not holding their attention.
Yeah. Yeah.
That's always my concern about the first 10 minutes of Visitors, that people are going to watch it and go like, it's just these two people who I don't know kind of talking about nothing for 10 minutes. And it does get past that, but it's a speed bump on the way, I think, sometimes.
Mm. Interesting. I don't think I look at it that way, but I guess I had a different perspective. um,
Just because you thought that they were, like, the scene works well enough on its own.
yeah, and that leads me to the next point. And I think the major thing that sold that opening scene in particular for me, but it works throughout the entire episode, is the music. I
Yeah.
absolutely love the music in this. I think the music underlines, like, very subtly underpins why this moment is important, particularly when older Jake says, "Oh, you're here today of all days." Like, the music really sets the stage that that's an important line
Yep.
that has more meaning. And I think throughout, the music really has this really strong emotional underpinning of everything that's going on without being too interfering. And this is something I've heard a few people say, that the music in Star Trek, Deep Space Nine, and the later half of Next Gen and Voyager was, they call it wallpaper music and said it wasn't particularly good, and I very strongly disagree with that. Like, some of the music, mostly done by Dennis McCarthy, but some of the music I think is very powerful, and I think this episode's a strong example. Maybe it's because when I was a teenager, I actually had the soundtrack to this episode
This episode.
on CD. Yeah.
Was McCarthy the DS9 composer?
Yeah, I believe he took over for the second half of TNG. He was there once in a while for TNG, but he took over for a second half of TNG. I believe DS9 Voyager was mostly
Yep.
McCarthy. Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, because I would agree that most of it is kind of background music, like the whatever the name of the guy was who did the first couple seasons of TNG.
Ron Jones.
Jones, like his,
Yeah.
because he did Best of Both Worlds, right? Like, to
Yes.
me,
Yeah, he
Best of
did.
Both Worlds is the most iconic and like memorable Star Trek music.
Mhm.
After that, I will say that I noticed this one, but I didn't think anything outside of it was pleasant in supporting the scenes. Really, like it never gets too schmaltzy. It never gets
Mhm.
particularly like overblown. Um, but it doesn't catch my ear in a way that I go like, oh, that's very unique in the way the Best of Both Worlds does. Like there's something memorable there, and I don't think that it is as memorable to me in this episode. But while I'm on the train of thought, how would you rank the Star Trek theme songs, the intros?
I think I might have done a video for this
Mm.
already. I don't remember.
We can link it in the description of the
Yeah.
podcast.
I think, well, just the music. I think I put. Well, it's dependent. I think the video I did was how it relates to the show. So is it how it
Yeah, you,
relates
you could
to the
take the
show?
whole. You could take the imagery. You could take the music. You could take everything. The
Yeah.
fonts.
Uh, well, yeah, TNG and Voyager were my favorites.
Okay.
But as far as like background music, like I don't know. I liked Ron Jones, and I think a lot of his music did work sometimes. Sometimes it didn't, but it was a different style, which I would describe as kind of intrusive, like even the Best of Both Worlds was, but not saying it didn't work. I agree. The Best of Both Worlds music was spectacular, but I think the style that Dennis McCarthy does is more subtle, and I think sometimes that sells it better to me. Um,
Sure.
yeah,
Yeah, I mean, if you, um, because I mean, it's a franchise that, like, outside of the theme songs, I don't really remember too much of the music for it, and that's partially me because I never noticed music too much in the first place. It's
uh,
not the thing that really hits me, unless it's no, that's why I would like Tarantino so much. It's like unless it's songs, I don't connect with it too much.
oh right, right,
And when Star Trek does songs, I think it's terrible because it doesn't suit the franchise.
yes,
Or maybe not terrible, but like, the Beastie Boys and Beyond. That was Beyond, right? Yeah, I think
yeah.
so.
I actually kind of like that one.
I like that one. I think that one's clever too because it's kind of poking fun.
Yeah.
But other ones would be like, what song is it in? Oh, in like First Contact, it's is it
Oh,
Frog
oh,
Hat?
yes. Magic Carpet Ride.
Magic Carpet Ride. Yeah,
Yeah.
and I'm like, it's just, I just, that's not. I would have picked a different song for
Oh,
Zeppelin
really?
Cochrane. I think.
I don't know. I thought that one kind of worked, but I wasn't like loved it or anything.
Yeah,
It's I don't know, but I was the thing I thought of immediately was the Enterprise theme song.
that too. Yeah, they're
Oh
too
my
bad.
god, I can't even go on about how much I hate that. But anyway,
Well, they wanted it to be U2's "Beautiful Day," right? Like they cut the opening credits to to "Beautiful Day" as like their work track.
I never knew that.
I think
Huh.
that's the case. Yeah, and then they obviously can't afford U2, so they
Yes.
went with something else.
See, I like that song, "Beautiful Day," but I don't know if I would still be a fan of that as the theme of Enterprise. I just think
No,
using a song like that
yeah,
for a Star Trek theme is a bad idea,
yeah,
regardless of how good the song is.
and with just how relentlessly negative early Enterprise was. Like early Enterprise is basically a bunch of hicks go out into space and they run into like space assholes all the time, and it's like the beautiful day stuff doesn't really make sense there because
No.
like if that show had been about, if that show was actually about the founding of the Federation, you could
Mm,
maybe make an argument, but it really wasn't that for the first couple seasons. It was just running into mean aliens all the time.
well, they absolutely should have 86 that song, especially. I mean, kind of made sense for the first two seasons, but by the time they got to season 3 and 4, we have these teasers with like Vulcan zombies or like Zindi going around killing people. And then you cut to "It's been a long road." It
That's
was so jarring.
It was the relentless negativity of later seasons. That's why it was always a bad choice because it never matched what the show wanted.
Yeah.
Because I think DS9 is my favorite theme song intro of all of them.
Okay.
And I particularly I like the early DS9 seasons, which is not this one, right? This is the theme songs changed season
Yeah,
4. I
the
think they
new
morphed it
theme
into.
song came in season 4, so this is
Yeah.
the second episode they used it.
I like the first version better. I think it's a little bit less bombastic.
Yeah.
I think it has this sort of like harrowingness of like this sort of loneliness shimmer to it. Like it's just a station out in the middle of nowhere, and it has a very like eerie, you're on your own kind of vibe to it, and I like that. I think that the season 4 onward is like it gets more of the military bombast of the show because that matches it, but I think that it doesn't suit it at the same time.
Oh, right. Yeah. I don't know. I was always a bigger fan of the Voyager one than the DS9 one. I thought the DS9 was a bit too, especially with the visuals. I described it as a bit too boring for
It
for what
is.
Star Trek
Yeah,
does.
I find Voyager goes too excessive in the look at all these weird alien planets we're flying by. It's like here's an ice moon, here's the sun, here's this stuff. Because I think that's why TNG doesn't hold up too well for me because TNG looks like an intro like level 101 Photoshop kind of class. Like someone just put this together, and it doesn't have a, just with like to convey moving through space, the planets are just coming from the sides of the screen and fading down, and then the ship is just there, and there's no sense of scale. There's no sense of anything to it. So it's interesting. And I also, ever since I was younger and I learned that the TNG theme song was just the motion picture theme song, and they just did
Yeah.
it, I lost a little bit of respect for that theme song. So I don't know why. It doesn't make any sense.
Well, I was gonna say like Jerry Goldsmith did the TNG theme song
Yeah.
or the motion picture went to TNG. He also did the Voyager one, and I like those theme songs, but I don't like the background music he did for the movies. I think he did the later TNG movies, First Contact, Insurrection, Nemesis, and I think they progressively got worse. Where Nemesis had some of the worst music I think of any Star Trek property of anything, whereas I actually love the music in Generations, which was Dennis McCarthy, and because that's, to me, that's like the signature. That's what I think of when I think of TNG DS9 era music. I think of Dennis McCarthy.
Interesting.
But yeah, that's just me. Anyway,
because that's interesting you said that. I didn't know that, but McCarthy doing, if everything you're saying is true, and I don't doubt that it is, I'm no expert on it, but that vibe suits Generations. That's like the perfect vibe for the Generations film, I think, is to be like unobtrusive and not this is all it's all personal, but like not trying too hard. You know what I mean? Like it fit. The Generations is the most TNG of the movies, I think, and it's like it fits to have that kind of music in that movie.
I think that music is spectacular, personally. Like the moment where Picard is like in the Nexus and you see the Christmas tree and he looks at it shining and he starts to feel something's wrong. I think the music is what really sells that.
More it's no Magic Carpet Ride. He should have turned on the record player and had Magic Carpet Ride. Come on, that would have been the best film of all time.
All right, so yeah, let's go ahead and wrap things up now, since we're totally off topic. But I think we kind of covered everything now. So I'll ask you the particular question I always ask my guests when they come on for one of my entries in my top 25. Where do you think you would rate this on your own personal top 25? Would it be higher, closer to number one, or lower, like further down, or around the same?
I should have done the math on this. How many episodes of Star Trek are there? Do you know? Like 900 or something?
I think if we're talking like 5 legacy shows, not including any of the modern stuff, I think it's around 500.
Okay. Yeah, because I mean, the Voyager would have had TNG. It's probably a little bit more, right? Because TNG, DS9, and Voyager all had like 175-ish around.
Yeah.
There. So you're probably around like maybe 600, 700.
Maybe. Yeah, it could be.
So if you had more, so we'll say there's 800 episodes of Star Trek to make the math not particularly easy, but it sounds like it's a nice, easy number. If you're in the top 80, you're in the top 10%, right? So that's like to scale this. Yeah. It's much higher than that. Top 40 would be top 5%. To me, this is a top 10 franchise episode, I think. So it would be higher than your rating, which is 18, I think?
Yeah, 18. Yeah.
It's hard to say because it comes and goes, and I don't know how you rank things. You could explain. Norm says there's 904, according to Wikipedia.
Oh, okay. That might include Modern Trek.
Yeah, it probably does.
Yeah.
I think this is easy a top 10 for me, without a doubt. I think it's one of the few very emotionally affecting episodes of Star Trek. It always makes me teary-eyed a little bit. It's very sad at the end. I think that everything really lands for it. And I think that, constructing a top 10 list is difficult because you run into this thing of like, should I be fair and have a couple sci-fi episodes? Should it all be the episodes that make me cry? Should it be the episodes that do this kind of thing? And I think that this is just, there's very few Star Trek episodes that I think you could show this out of context to anyone, and I think that they would like it, right? Like that's rare for a Star Trek episode. Even some of the great episodes, people would be like, what is this? Like, what's going on?
Yeah.
And Visitor does not have any of that. So for that reason, for me, it's a top 10 episode. And I've read all the reviews that like sort of say that, and then they have a comment section at the bottom, and people go, "This is one of the worst episodes of Star Trek ever." And I don't understand. I don't understand the counter arguments to the
Yeah.
Visitor, really, which is what puts it in a place where I think that it's really fantastic, because I don't see much of a downside to it.
Yeah, it's hard to say how I rank my episodes or how I determine it, because I tend to favor those that affect me more emotionally. But then again,
Do you
I'm
have a?
thinking,
I don't mean to interrupt. Do you have a
sure,
process for ranking them? Like, do you have a? Because when I rank things, or if I have to
yeah,
make a list, I do a thing where I write all the things on the piece of a paper, and then I compare them. So I do like a head-to-head comparison. I say I prefer this one, and I put it in one pile, and I lesser this one. And then as you sort them into different piles, you kind of end up with like a rough idea of where things line up for you. I don't know if you have a process or how you determine your numbers, but that's how I would. That's how I
yeah,
would do it.
it's kind of similar. So with this top 25 of the franchise, I already had my top tens for each of the 5 series.
Right.
So I just took them, like kind of smushed them together, and would rank them against each other.
Yep.
Which episode do I like better? Do I like this one better? I like that one better, and sort of came up with my top 25 that way.
Yep. Yep. So what's so
And
I mean
sometimes as we're going, I'm starting to doubt myself,
right.
because last week was my number 19 was Kier Shar, the Vulcan episode of Enterprise.
Oh sure.
And originally I had that as my number 18, but because of your scheduling issues, I actually changed it, switched them around. But now that I'm thinking about it, the Visitor is actually better than Kier Shar. So why did I have Kier Shar before? It actually makes more sense to have the Visitor higher.
I'm honestly surprised Kirshar is in your top 25 of the franchise. That is that I'll have to go listen to that episode, because that is a bold. Who's your guest on that one?
I think I have a much better opinion of that episode than you do.
Yeah.
My guest on that one was my sister Alyssa, and then Darren from D's reviews.
Oh, gotcha. Everyone liked the episode. Everyone likes Kirshar.
Yeah, Alyssa did her 100 recently, and she had it like at 97, so she didn't like it as much as I did. And Darren said he would have it a lot lower, so they tend to do agree that I had it too high.
This is going to be an awkward Thanksgiving then for you.
But yeah, I don't know. So it's hard for me to say. Like sometimes I do doubt myself with my rankings.
Yep.
But I do tend to favor the episodes that are sort of more emotionally impactful. But I am thinking of later, there's some episodes coming up that are more action oriented that I had higher than this one. And I do think I did strike it just a tad. I mean, it's still top 20, which, as you say, that's what, top 3% or top 5.
2.5.
Top 2.5 of the entire franchise. So it's still gold standard.
Yeah.
But I struck it a little bit just because that Klingon storyline irritated me slightly.
Yeah, no, it's, I mean, I think that for when you have so many episodes of something that manages to make it into the top is clearly just going to have some kind of staying power and authenticity to it. Like I think that my top episodes usually tend to have either an incredible emotional component. Like so for the reason why Visitor ranks so high is that I think it's basically perfect sci-fi in that it has a science fiction veneer over a very human thing. And it's like sort of a profound idea of like wasting your life. And like, the Stoics would describe it as like being distracted by these outside forces that you have no control over, and it shouldn't mean anything to you. So you need to stop thinking about it. You can't stop this. So it has that going for it. And I think that the sci-fi veneer is thin enough where you don't scare off someone who doesn't care about sci-fi, and the other series, Star Trek eventually got confused about this. It moved in a direction where it was like, people like sci-fi. They like the characters saying nonsense to each other all the time. And that's what they basically do nowadays. And that's not the case. Like the case is this core story is so good. And I'm always going to love my cause and effects, which are pure sci-fi. Like there's no character work going on
Yeah,
there whatsoever,
yeah.
but it's just kind of a cool idea and it's a neat, fun thing. But at the same time, I think like things like Visitor are just much harder to produce. I think like this is Star Trek at its peak is when it's doing things like this. And Cause and Effect is a very very good episode.
Mm.
Also would be in my top 10, but it's a different kind of beast, I think, and it's a this is just kind of like the gold standard for what Star Trek stories try to do most of the time, or should try to do.
Yeah, and now as you were talking, as I was thinking about it, I think character stories do play a major factor in I how much I liked it. Like
Yeah,
even the stuff that's more scientific orientated or more action orientated, they have to have really strong character stories for me to really put it up there.
yeah. That's why Kishara strikes me so funny because I'm sure Archer ran down a hallway with a phaser at the end of that episode, and you got your action dose out of it. Yeah.
Yeah. God, I'm
Which
trying
one
to.
is Kishara in the Vulcan trilogy? Is that the
It's the
ending?
final one.
The final
Yeah,
one.
it's
Okay.
the third one. Yeah.
Did
I don't.
did I mean for your for the Visitor to end like is this your highest DS9 episode? I
Oh
guess.
no. No, no,
No.
no, no.
Okay.
It's actually the first DS9 episode I covered in my top 25. Most of
Right.
mine are cluttered toward the top.
Yep.
So
So
yeah.
yeah, we won't spoil it, but is there a series that has see the other thing that I was when I was thinking like, oh, if I made a top 25 list, what would it look like? And my my list would be I can already see the complaints because someone would click on it and go, you don't have any Enterprise episodes.
Mm,
You don't have any. Maybe you don't even. You might not have any Voyager episodes. Really,
yeah.
it's like that's true. This is a factual thing. My top 25 would just be cluttered with TNG and DS9, and then a
Mm,
smattering of TOS, and maybe a Voyager sneaks in there
okay.
somewhere.
Yeah. I think DS9 and Next Generation comprise the bulk of my
Yeah,
top 25. I think the third behind that is actually Voyager, because I think Voyager for me was a very hit or miss show, and I think when it hit really well, but the majority of it's like mediocrity.
yeah, yeah.
But TOS, I actually only had three, and two of them were like between 25 and 20. So there's
I would
only
be the
one that
same.
reached my top 20. Yeah.
In my top 25, it's probably just going off the top of my head, it's maybe two episodes. Like, it's not a lot of the list would be 2S, but
Mm.
it's like I think there are just some TOS just had like just maybe three like undeniable like great banger episodes, and you're just like, well, I have to put these, but it doesn't, as you say, a lot of TOS is like this is not particularly good. I don't like watching this at all. But there are the three that they have that are very strong are very strong.
Yeah, no, exactly. Yeah, and as I said for the character stuff, I think that's why I consider Deep Space Nine my favorite Star Trek show out of the franchise, because I think they have the strongest character based stuff and they don't get bogged down with all the techno babble that Next Gen and Voyager tends to.
Yeah, yeah. Although I don't know how you feel about this. DS9 suffers from not being as pick up and play as TNG. It's sometimes hard to just pick a random episode of DS9 and be like, I'm going to watch this one, because it's so much of it is contextual.
Yeah, I agree with that, but that actually doesn't concern me. I'm actually fine with that.
Yeah,
Because it was funny because I had a friend once who was visiting from another part of the country, and I was showing her, had never seen Star Trek before, showing her different Star Trek episodes, showed her like Tapestry and God, what Inner Light, and she like loved them. And then I tried to show her a DS9 episode, like what's the one, the two-parter with Garrick and Odo with the
oh,
Dominion one.
the
Yeah, I tried to show her
dies
that.
cast, the dies
Yeah,
cast,
that
and
one,
the other one.
and something implausible,
Isn't it
implausible
Inferno? Is
falls.
not no.
No, Infernal is season 5. Yeah, that
yeah,
was
something
later.
cause implausible
Yeah,
cause, something like that.
something like that. But anyway, she didn't get into it at all because she had no context
Mm-hmm.
to what. And that's so it's true. I think and this would probably be a better DS9 episode to show a newbie, as you
Yes.
said. But I don't actually, that doesn't factor into how much I would rank or put the episode in for me personally.
Gotcha. Because I think even a lot of the great DS9 episodes need context. I think, like, if you don't understand Odo at all, it's tough to watch the great Odo episodes and go like, oh yeah, like this works for me. But that's just it's not a downside. It's only a downside in the fact that it's hard to rewatch. I still DS9 for me is still the pinnacle of the franchise in a lot of in terms of being a TV show. My statement is always that TNG is the best Star Trek show and DS9 is the best television show of the franchise.
Hmm.
And yeah, it's been nice to go back to Visitor just because we've been stuck in Voyager, as I've been saying, and it's like, oh my goodness, like I think we underappreciated DS9
Yeah.
when we were watching it, just because we hadn't watched Voyager first,
Well,
Enterprise.
not just Voyager, but the armpit of Voyager, in my,
Yeah,
in my opinion.
we'll see. I mean, yeah, we'll see. It's just I know that these characters don't particularly develop on Voyager. Like they're going, and when 7 comes, a few of them are just going to be kicked to the back too, because they're like, well, now we got 7
Yeah.
here. So
So I think season 4 Voyager is the best, but then after you got season 4, it starts to slide into mediocrity and get progressively more worse. And by the end of the show, it becomes the 7 of 9 and the Doctor show, and all the other characters just don't matter.
yeah, 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 and yeah, I don't. We'll see how we do when we get to the end of it. But it's because Voyager was the one I was least familiar with too. I think.
Oh,
So
was it?
that's
Okay,
yeah.
right. So had you seen like Deep Space Nine episodes before you did your full?
Not all the way through. So
Okay.
I think watching TNG on the podcast, I confirmed that I had seen all TNG episodes. Before that, I was unsure if I had actually seen every single episode. And doing the podcast, I was like, yes, there was not a single episode that I had not seen before. DS9 was kind of the same. I'd seen a lot of them, but never in order in any way that made sense. And so it felt kind of disconnected. And Voyager is, I know the hits of Voyager, I think would be the way to describe it. And that's about it.
Yeah. Interesting. All right, cool. Well, thank you so much, Wes, for coming on to talk about this episode. I think I remember for one of our previous discussions, that was one of your favorite episodes, why I chose you for this particular episode.
Thank you very much.
Yeah, thanks for coming, and thanks for everyone watching in the chat. We had Norman, Brandon, Jake Kamen 99, and plus a few others. My scrolly is not working, but thank you so much for joining as well, and everyone watching this in the archives. Thank you so much. Any final words, or you want to plug what you're doing now before we take off, Wes?
Sure. I mean, the Pensky podcast is the big Star Trek podcast. That's on YouTube as the feed. It's the Pensky podcast. We are doing a Deadwood podcast right now. We're going through all the HBO Deadwood episodes. My favorite show of all time. Clay has a horror show called Rotten Horror Picture Show, which is on the YouTube channel, and he does another one called Badass. Because Clay is a comic book artist, and so he has Sean Murphy of the new Batman universe, and they have a podcast about the animated series of Batman. So all that stuff, talking about pop culture, blah, blah, blah. It's all on the YouTube channel, and it's all on the podcast apps. So thanks very much for listening. Thank you for having me, Mark. It was nice to be back. It's good to be here.
Absolutely. All right, and if you're finding me for the first time, my name's Mark. My channel's Enchantment of Eternity. I'm every month doing a different live stream with different guests, counting down my top 25 favorite episodes of Star Trek. But besides that, I'm going through and reviewing every episode of Star Trek that I haven't covered yet. And at the moment, just about to start season 2 of Next Generation. So a marginal improvement over season 1.
Are you? What the hell is the modern? Are you still up to date on modern?
Oh yeah. I'm covering modern as it goes. At the moment, Lower Decks season 4 is airing.
Yes, that makes sense. What just finished? Was Picard the most recent thing that finished?
Yeah,
Strange
Picard.
Or is that still going?
No, Strange New Worlds finished season 2, and then Lower Decks started season 4 right after that.
How was Strange New World season 2?
I still liked it. Strange New Worlds is still my favorite of the modern Trek shows, but
Yeah.
I thought season 2 was a slight step down from season 1.
Yeah.
But it was still good, I thought.
Yeah. Yeah. Modern Trek hurt us badly. I would have said that Stranger Worlds season 1 was my favorite of the new Star Treks as well. But we didn't. We haven't followed up with season 2. Was it 10 episodes again?
Yeah, it was. Yeah,
Yeah.
no, you should check it out. Most of it's good.
Star Trek Picard just broke us. It was like, what is this? I don't want to watch any of this.
Yeah, Picard season 3, I think, has got to be the most overrated season of Star Trek ever. It was all memory
Yeah.
berries, and it wasn't put together particularly well. It didn't, to me, didn't serve those characters very well. I mean, there were moments I liked, but that's the problem. There were moments that were good, but it was in between a lot of junk, in my opinion.
Yeah, someone posted a link. Patrick Stewart's pitching like a Picard movie to wrap it up.
Yes,
Because
yeah,
he wants to wrap up the thing for the 50th time, and then he's running out of money or something. I guess his book isn't selling as good as he thought it would. But yeah, the Picard's. I would agree with you. The Picard season 3 is probably one of the most overrated. Like in terms of just what people were saying about it, I was just kind of flabbergasted.
Yeah,
it was like.
yeah.
It just opens your eyes to, don't believe everything you read. Right?
Yeah.
Everyone's got their own opinions, but I thought I saw some opinions that were just not grounded in what was on the screen. It's just like you're not talking about what's actually happening here. So we'll see.
Well, yeah. To me, I would say it felt like it's for people. The people who loved it were the ones who just want nostalgia, who just want callbacks.
Yeah,
That's,
yeah.
It's funny because people say that about Lower Decks, but I think Lower Decks, even though it has a lot of nostalgia and callbacks, that it's also doing something new and original at the same time.
It's using nostalgia as it's weaponizing nostalgia. Basically, it's like it's making the point of it. But Picard didn't have anything to say about anything there. Yeah. We'll talk about that next time, I think.
Yeah. No.
I will not be rewatching it, though, before we...
Oh, hell no. Fair enough.
Well, thanks again, Mark. Thanks for having me.
Yeah, no, thanks for coming on, and thanks, everyone, for watching. And, we'll go ahead and sign off now. So we'll see you all later.
See ya.